Actually, the procurement means outsourcing. So we are trying to get some goods or services from outside, not within your organization, from outside. Like as an example, if you get a software project, so you are trying to develop a system for a company which does not have any software product using for selling their product. Okay, so then you need to buy some kind of hardware as well. So you will develop the software itself by your organization, but you may have to buy the hardware from outside sources. So it is called, we are outsourcing source. We are not going to uh, build the hardware now from the components. We are trying to get it from outside supplier. So that is called outsourcing, or another in another words, procurement. Okay. So in this main topic, we will be discussing about importance of IT procurement management and main processes. Okay. So these are the main processes. So planning procurement, conducting procurement, administering is actually changed to controlling procurement. So this should be changed to controlling procurements and closing procurements. So administering was used in previous editions of project management edition, body of knowledge. So however, it is now replaced with controlling. So instead of administering, you should mention controlling. Okay. So the last one is closing procurement. So why is it procurement important? So this is the definition of procurement. It means acquiring goods and services from an outside source. Okay. So other terms of procurement, as I mentioned previously also, purchasing or outsourcing. And some people debate about this, whether this outsourcing helps a country or not. For our country, for instance, most of the things were outsourced. Okay, now it's we are trying to produce some things in the country, like some agricultural products like turmeric, and also some other products like those vaccines and saline I saw recently. However, most of the things are outsourced. Okay, so that's why we need a great amount of money to buy things. Although the things we can produce here, we try to outsource. So it depends on this political background as well. So some people debate about these things. So if we, in one hand, if we need to put more money to develop, produce a product, rather than whether it is cheap to buy it from other country, I mean, it's good to buy it from the other country. So some people debate on that, but the other side, they say that outsourcing is not always good, because we have to always depend on others. We are trying to get things from other side, other companies, so we have to, we are depending on others. Okay. So some companies like Walmart prefer to do no outsourcing at all. So they are developing everything they need, not developing, actually manufacturing everything they need. While others do a lot of outsourcing, they do not try to build everything inside their organization. So most organizations do some form of outsourcing to meet their IT needs, and they try to spend most of the money within their own country. Okay, that's a good thing. If we can spend the money inside our own country, it's very good, rather than try to get everything from other countries or from other suppliers outside the country. So actually the temporary workforce, if you look at the temporary workforce, it continues to grow as people work for temporary job agencies. So it is easy to move from company to company for this temporary workforce. So in one hand, so outsourcing also creates jobs. So because of that, there's a temporary workforce built to accompany this outsourcing process. So there are intermediate jobs produced as well from this outsourcing process. But some people like Walmart company, they do not like to do outsourcing at all because they like to manufacture every part they need, everything they need inside their own company. So IT outsourcing, if we look at the IT outsourcing, this application development is the most popular form of IT outsourcing. Okay, so this is revealed by an survey done with using some IT organizations. So they identified this application development is the most outsourced thing. And they also have found that disaster recovery services develop disaster recovery systems account for 50% of total IT outsourcing, if you look at specific areas. Okay, so those are some facts you can see from surveys. You can observe from survey results. So why do we outsource? So why is this so important? So sometimes, as a simple example, when you are, if you live in the boarding house, you may always like to buy some foods from a shop rather than cooking it by yourself, isn't it? When the examination is coming nearby, you may not have time to waste on cooking things. Okay, so you are also outsourcing. So it is to allow most of the time for your dedicated activity, like for studying, you need more time. So you are trying to save that time from outsourcing that cooking process. Okay. So likewise, outsourcing is mainly done to allow client organization to focus on its core business. They don't like to worry about those building those hardware by themselves. Okay. So as an example, if we get a project, we need some 10 computers. So one way is to get the parts and assemble the computers by yourself. But your project manager may decide to outsource it. So we need the computers with all the things assembled. We don't have time to waste on that. Okay, so we have other things to do, which we are good at. Okay, so we are allowing the client organization to focus on its core business. Okay, so we are developing the application for this particular project. So it is more important than just assembling those hardware parts together. Okay, so it is better to give it to the outside company. So that is one purpose. And secondly, to reduce both fixed and recurrent costs. So there are some fixed costs and there are recurrent costs which would occur if we try to do some activities without outsourcing. Okay, recurrent costs are reoccurring. Okay, so so we can reduce that if we give that particular task to other company, because they are very good at it and they know how to do that with less time, with less cost. Okay, so sometimes we may need more skilled people on that particular function. So we may need to spend some more money. However, some other companies may be there to do that particular job specifically. So they may do the same thing over and over with the people. So people have experience. So they would be able to give the particular task we require for less amount of money. Okay. And to access skills and technologies. So that is also covered actually when I discuss point 2. So we may need to access some skills and technologies if we need to without outsourcing. If you are trying to do it by your own organization, you may not have particular skills required to produce that product. Okay, and you may not know about the new technologies. You may not have experience, but some other company who is specialized on the particular subject would have those skills and technologies required. And to provide flexibility. So it's flexible actually when we give that to other, there are many available companies which would provide the same service or product we require to outsource. So, and we also have some time. It's very flexible. So it would provide some flexibility. This outsourcing would provide some flexibility for you to choose different technologies or different structures. Maybe if we try to go for a computer, try to buy a computer, there are many providers. Okay, so those providers would provide those products differently, like different brands, branded machines like HP, Dell. So we have quite a lot of variation. So we have flexibility to buy the required product from the available outsourcing companies. Okay, to increase accountability. So they are accountable for the service or product they provide. So we are not accountable for the service or product they are producing. Okay. So when you are doing outsourcing, contracts are unavoidable. Okay. So what is a contract? Contract is something in between two parties. So what are the two parties? Buyer and a seller. So it is a mutually binding agreement. So it means mutual means both sides have some responsibilities. So that would obligate the seller to, what are the two sides? Seller and the buyer. So what are the obligations? Seller should provide specified products according to specifications, and buyer is obligated to pay for that product after that seller provides a goods or service. Okay. So contract is mutually binding agreement. Two sides are bound together. So contracts are used to clarify the responsibilities and sharpen the focus on key deliverables. So we can use them to specifically mention these are the specifications we need. This is the warranty period, and these are the technical specifications. This much of hard disk is required, hard disk space is required, this much of memory is required. So likewise, we can specify things using contract, and also the seller can mention this much of hard disk is available, and this much of RAM is available, and this is the price. So likewise, he also can give details from his side using this contract. So these contracts are related to legal. They are legal actually. So both of the sides are legally bound. So seller should provide the mentioned product at the required specification or the standard, and buyer should pay for it. Okay, so both sides are actually legally safe to some extent. So there's more accountability from both sides. So that is actually about the contract, which is we'll be discussing about contract under other topics as well. So that is one term which is unavoidable when we talk about outsourcing. Okay. So project procurement management, under procurement management, there are 4 main processes included in PMBO, project management body of knowledge. Okay. So project procurement management, as we mentioned earlier, also is acquiring goods and services for a project from outside the performing organization. Okay. What are the processes that include in PMO? For your knowledge in this procurement management, planning procurements, conducting procurements, controlling procurements, and closing procurement. So in planning procurements, we determine what to procure. Are you going to procure this product or service or not? If you are going to procure, when and how are we going to do that? So those are decided in when you're planning. So in conducting procurement, so we are going to conduct it. So to conduct a procurement, we need to do some contracts. So we need to obtain sellers' responses. We have to select the sellers and award contract. Okay. And in controlling procurements, we need to manage relationships with sellers and also look at how the contracts are going on, in what stages are the contracts are performed. And we have to do the changes if changes are required as well. So that is controlling procurements and closing procurements. And at the end of the project, we have to complete and settle each and every contract, including resolving if there are any open items. Okay. So this is the time frame which these phases are occurring. So first one is planning procurement management, which is actually happens, starts earlier and would happen late near the end of the project, and executing would happen throughout just after planning. And monitoring and control, specifically control procurements happens in the mid period, and closing would happen so soon after we start the procurements. The started procurements after the time period, we have to close them. So that's why we start this rather early in the project. And so let's go one by one. So about planning procurement. So we identify which part of the project need to be met by using outside products or services. And if there's no need to buy any products or service from outside, you don't need to perform any procurement management process. Okay. So assume that you are an IT company. So you have a particular project to develop to update a software system. Okay. So they have all the hardware parts available. So you may also have skilled people to do that particular update. So then you don't need to procure anything. Okay. You don't need to outsource anything. You don't need to buy any computers or any parts for the project. Or you have all the skilled people to update the software required. Okay. So there are situations like that where you don't need to buy any product or service from outside the organization. So these are the tools and techniques of planning purchases and acquisitions or planning procurements. So the first one is to determine whether you are going to buy or do it by yourself. Okay. Sorry, buy or lease. So we can, a product actually you can buy or lease. So that is actually can be decided by writing a small formula for particular products. So here we are talking about make or buy analysis. So whether we are organization should make or perform a particular product or services outside the organization is decided by this method. So we'll apply this method to a particular case study, small case study, so that you can understand what is this make or buy analysis process. Okay. So often this involves financial analysis. So we'll apply this to one particular problem and have a look at how can we decide whether to make or buy that particular product. So here you can see in this particular case study, there's a situation given. So assume that you can lease an item. So that's why I told you this is lease or buy. So that is very clearly the same meaning. Okay. Assume you can lease an item you need for a project for $800 per day. To purchase the item, the cost is $12,000 plus a daily operational cost of $400 a day. Okay, so there's a very small mathematical analysis you need to do. So you have to determine how long will it take for the purchase cost to be the same as the lease cost. You can write the equation and find out how long would it require to purchase for the purchase cost to be same as the lease cost. So then with having that number of days or number of weeks, I think you will get the answer in number of days because this is given as per day. So if it is, let's assume that it is 10 days, we need 10 days to the purchase cost to be same as the lease cost. Okay, so what would happen if we want to use it more than 10 days? What is actually beneficial? Buying or leasing? So if we lease actually, after 10 days, we are covering up that amount. Okay, after 10 days, the amount we are paying for the leasing companies more than what we need to pay if we buy that thing. So if you want to use it more than 10 days, it's better to buy it. If it's less than 10 days, we may not need to waste such amount of money. So if you want to use only 2 days, that item, you can decide to just release it. Okay. We get the component from other company and use it and return it. Like as an example, if we say a plotter, you need to use a plotter for certain time period, maybe 2 days. However, you can also, there are 2 options. You can lease it or you can buy it. Maybe a printer or a scanner. You can assume that it's a scanner or printer. So let's try to do this and understand. So you can set up an equation. So both options, purchase and lease, are equal. For example, I think I have not given the equation. So we will write it here. So assume you can lease an item you need for a project for $800 per day. So I'll get the pointer. To purchase the item, the cost is $12,000. Okay. So the cost is $12,000 plus there's a daily operational cost $400 per day. So if you want for D number of days, okay. So this side of the equation I wrote would give the amount of money you need if you buy the printer. So let's assume that this item is a printer, okay. So if you buy the printer and use it for 10 days or D number of days, we need this amount of money. So how much would it cost if we lease it? So daily, if you lease it, it's $800, not 400. It should be 800, okay? 800 into D days. We are going to lease it for D number of days. So this is the equation you need. Okay? So then you can determine D from this equation. 800 minus 400, 400 and you can cross over these two zeros, and it's 30. Okay, the number of days which you get for the purchase cost to be equal to the lease cost is 30. So if you want to use it more than 30 days, it's beneficial to buy it. Okay. If you want to use it less than 30 days, it means you don't need to waste such a lot of money on buying it. You just can lease it. Okay. So depending on this number, you can decide whether you can outsource or outsource, actually not outsourcing, you can lease or buy the product. Okay. So that's the first one, make or buy analysis. So if you need item for more than 30 days, it's more economical to buy it. Okay. If it's less than 30 days, it's more economical to lease it. So this is one tool you can use to determine whether you can buy it for yourself or you are going to lease it from outside. The outsourcing is better. So there are different types of contracts. So I told you that we are going to talk about contracts more. So here we are going to talk about few different types. So these are used in different situations if you look at. The first one is fixed price or lump sum contracts. Okay. So in this fixed price, as the name implies, so it would involve a fixed total price. So the product, we are not given any partial percentages of cost or things like that. The fixed total price would be paid if you get the correct product. Okay. So in reimbursable contract, so the seller would be paid for direct and indirect costs. So we don't know the indirect costs yet. So for the direct costs as well as indirect costs, we would be paying money. So in here, everything is included in this lump sum. Okay. And time and material contracts, it's a hybrid of both fixed price and cost reimbursable. It's a hybrid of these two. So often here, fixed price and cost-related and cost-related indirect and direct amounts would be paid. So that is related with time and materials involved in the contract. Okay. And in unit price contracts, it would require the buyer to pay the seller a predetermined amount per unit of service. Okay. So it's based on units. How many units do you need? One unit costs this much. So in your contract, you are specifying unit price only. Okay, so that is different from the other four. So however, there are some contracts, you will include all of these different types. So it depends on the situation you are going to contract your service or product. So these are some terms you need to know. So this is actually point of total assumption, where the cost at which a contract assumes total reimbursable for each additional dollar of the contract cost is called the point of total assumption. So mainly this is done because contractors do not want to reach the point of total assumption, because we are defining point of total assumption where cost at which the contractor assumes total responsibility for each additional dollar of contract cost, because mainly they may have to pay more, because for each additional dollar they have the responsibility. The responsibility is given. Okay. So this PTA, when you are going to do a contract, you may need to determine the PTA, because for each additional dollar, the seller is responsible for. So PTA is normally determined by ceiling price subtracted by the target price divided by government share plus target cost. Okay. Above the BTA, seller have to pay for 100% of cost overruns. So after we decide this amount, so we can mention that this is the point of total assumption. So the more the dollars you spend, you have to, so they are actually, you have to pay for the cost overruns. So likewise, so this is very important tool which you can use to determine the overruns. Okay. So about the cost reimbursable contracts, so we are going to talk about this particular contract type into more detail. So it's mainly because that depends on the direct and indirect costs associated. So so this is the main umbrella which we are going to talk about. So it is related with indirect and direct costs. So depending on these indirect cost types, again, these cost reimbursable contracts can be categorized. So those categories are we are going to discuss here. Or cost plus fixed fee is the first type. So you can see, so this is the direct cost and fixed fee. So what is the fixed fee? So it's the indirect cost. Okay. So the buyer pays for the supplier for allowable performance cost plus a fixed fee, usually based on a percentage of estimated costs. So looking at the other estimated costs, so not other actually, looking at the estimated cost, a percentage of that cost amount is paid for the other expenses. Okay, so that is called the cost plus fixed fee. So that cost fixed fee is fixed mainly by this term, percentage of estimated cost. This cost estimated, the cost estimated here is multiplied by a percentage amount, maybe 2% of the cost. Okay, so cost is, if cost is $100, we are going to 2% of $2 more. Okay, so like that. And cost plus incentive fee. So what's the meaning of incentive? We are trying to give some incentive, okay, motivation, some kind of motivative incentive. The buyer pays the supplier for allowable performance cost plus a predetermined fee and an incentive bonus. So it is a motivative incentive amount of money. So that is also paid in this type of contracts, cost plus incentive fee. And cost plus percentage of costs. The buyer pays the supplier for allowable performance cost plus a determined percentage based on total costs. So this is actually based on total costs. So when the cost increases, what would happen? The cost plus percentage of costs also increases. So here the difference between the first one and the third one is this fixed fee is mainly based on percentage of estimated costs. Okay, so here this is based on total costs. So what would happen if the seller have a very high amount of costs? So buyer need to pay a percentage of that high amount also. So this cost per percentage of cost type of contract is what high risk for the buyer and less risky for the seller. Okay, seller would not worry about the cost because he is given a percentage based on the total cost he spent also. Okay, so looking at those these three main types, one can put this into a scale of buyer's risk and the seller's risk. So buyer's risk is highest for the cost plus percentage of cost, as we have discussed, because buyer's risk is very high for this, mainly because seller may increase the cost to have that percentage of cost to be higher. Okay, to increase the percentage of cost, the value amount, he would try to increase the costs also. So the buyer's risk is higher in this end. Okay. And seller's risk, if you look at, it is less at this point. However, here, cost plus intensive fee, so we are not going to talk about these things. Cost, only these three we are discussing. CPIF, cost plus incentive fee. Incentive is given. So you can see here the buyer pays the supplier for allowable performance cost plus a predetermined fee and incentive bonus. Okay, so these are fixed things. Okay, so there's not much risk with the buyer. However, if the cost increases, it would risk the seller. Okay, because he may not be able to give the product for the agreed amount of money. So the other indirect costs are actually fixed here, predetermined fee and incentive bonus. Okay. So since they are fixed, risk for the seller is higher, and for the buyer it is lower. Okay. So these are the three things you need to put into this buyer's risk and seller's risk and compare. So so we need to talk about contract clauses as well. So contracts, when you are writing the contract, you have to be very careful with the contract closure conditions. So it should include specific clauses that take into account issues that are unique to the project. Okay. So so you know how can contract be ended from both sides need to be documented very well. Okay. So in termination clause, it is mentioned that a contract clause that allows a buyer supply to end the contract. Though in termination clause, we can actually end from the both sides with some agreement. So these clauses, contract clauses need to be documented really specifically, particularly for the particular projects very well at the beginning when you are giving the contract. So we are going to look at the management plan now. For each and every knowledge area, we discussed about management plans. So here in procurement, in the management plan, it includes how the procurement process will be managed, from developing documentation for making outside purchases, starting from there to contract closure. Okay. So so for that, we may need a very experienced person to look at what need to be procured or outsourced, and then developing the contracts, including the contract closures. And statement of work also is a very important document which we include about the description of work required to be outsourced. Okay. So it is also, we give that also in this contract. It should be very descriptive and specifically written for the particular task or service we are going to outsource. So it should only describe the work that need to be outsourced, not the other parts related. So it's called contract statement of work. Okay. So it is a type of scope statement. So so we need this part of the project outsourced. So that part only should be very in detail written and attached to the contract. Okay. So it should give bidders better understanding of the buyer's expectations. So this is an example sample given for a statement of work. So you can see the guidelines given in developing this SOW here. So this is actually, you can see scope of work, describe the work to be done in detail. You specify the hardware and software involved and exact nature of the work required to outsource. Okay. And the location of work, it should describe where the work must be performed. So is it in should they come to your organization or should you go there? And the period of performance. So within 3 months, we expect this need to be ended, and you can specify the dates as well. Your starting date and ending date, working number of hours you need them to work in your company or in their company, and deliverables schedule. So list of specific deliverables you need at the end of this contract, and the standards, which quality standards you need, and what are any other specific company or industry related standards there. So you should mention them also. And what's the acceptance criteria? So how are you going to accept this? So how are you going to monitor this? And who is going to sign off? And if there are any other special requirements, such as hardware or software certifications, you also need to mention that here in the statement of work. So it's really important. This applies when you are trying to outsource part of your, assume that you are working in an IT company, and in that company you are given a project to develop some software for a particular client, okay? So then in that software, so for a software, there may be several modules. One module may not be able to be carried out by your own group members because you may not have particular skills. Okay, so if you are trying to outsource that, you have to mention all the clearly what need to be developed and what are the software standards required by yourself. So likewise, so this document is required at that situation. So particularly when you are outsourcing a component of your product, okay? Task, or in other words, task. So these are the procurement documents. Request for proposals is the first thing you can do. So this is used to solicit proposals from prospective sellers. So what is a proposal actually? It's a document prepared by the seller when there are different approaches for meeting buyer's needs. So you mentioned about your need. However, different companies may have different approaches of doing that. Okay, so let's assume get the same example. So there are different modules of for a particular software product you are developing, and you want to outsource one module because you don't have time, or you may not have the particular technology, or you may not have particular skills in your own group. Okay, so because of that, you need to outsource. So you are giving your specification or statement of work. So this one, you prepare this one and distribute. So you send it to different organizations, maybe IT organizations. Okay. So the different organization may have different ways of approaching the solution. So they prepare a proposal. Then there are different approaches. They will mention their approach. So you are going to do this way. We may need this amount of money. These are the resources, and this is the technology. So likewise, it would be very helpful for the person who are going to outsource the task. And so that is the request for proposals. So then that can be used to solicit the proposals from the prospective sellers. And request for quotes actually. So it's used to solicit quotes or bids from prospective suppliers. So what is a bid? So this, when you are talking about contracts or outsourcing, similarly as contracts, bid is very important. Okay. So it is a tender or a quote. Or quote means you know quotation. I think you may all have heard about quotations. So that is prepared mainly by the sellers, providing pricing for a standard item that have been clearly defined by the buyer. Okay. So the buyer defined the thing maybe using a statement of work, if it is a particular work, or they would give specifications. So if we need to buy some amount of computers, so it would be a technical specification and also related with the warranty period. So likewise, we need this much of memory, this much of speed, and this much of RAM, and this 3 years warranty. So likewise, your specification is given to the seller, and the seller produce this quotation, gives you a quotation. So assume that you are going to buy a computer also, you may get quotations from several shops, isn't it? So likewise, in a company also, we are given quotations for a particular task we need to outsource. Okay. So they clearly mention the pricing and also whether they agree with the specifications you required. This is there and this is not there. This is there and only 2 years warranty is given instead of 3. So you can decide using this quotation to buy it or not. So this is a request for proposal template. So purpose of the request for proposal is given, and organization's background, basic requirement, and hardware and software environment, description of reprocess, and statement of work and scheduled information, and appendices also you can include. So this is the request for proposal, and this is actually so here request for proposal is used to solicit proposals from prospective sellers. So proposal is a document prepared by the seller. Okay. Request for proposal is a document prepared by the other side. Okay, buyer. So he will include the other things as well. Things from his side. Okay, organization's background and requirements likewise. So evaluation. So after you get all these quotations and we have to evaluate them. So it's very important to prepare some form of evaluation criteria before issuing a formal request for proposals, because we can mention about that evaluation criteria also in the request for proposals document here from buyer's side. Okay. So some proposals may look very good in the paper. However, you have to evaluate the factors such as past performance and the management approach. As an example, when you are procuring things to your IT organization, you can look at the previous records from the same contractors. Okay, so from the same outside organizations. So if they are very clear and if they are clearly done and trust between the buyer and seller is kept very well, so then you can also go for the same person. So always as a project manager, they should not depend on only on the paper itself. They should look at the past experience as well. So as a part of the proposal, you can request for a technical presentation as well. Then you can look at the technical soundness of the task which they are going to provide you. And when conducting procurement, so the things we have discussed so far actually components of this contracting process. Okay, so we discussed about different types of contracts you can use, and in this process about the proposals and how you can develop a request for proposals, and from other side how they can give quotations of particular products you are going to purchase. So likewise, we have now got some knowledge about these different components in which are parts of this contract process. Okay. So about the evaluation criteria. So now we are looking at how can we conduct the procurements together with these parts discussed. Okay. So in conducting procurement, you have to decide whom to ask to do the work. Okay. So you have to send appropriate documentation to potential sellers. So appropriate documentation includes request for proposals, or maybe that's those specifications written if it is a product, if it's if actually a part or component. So if it's a task, you will have to write a request for proposals, okay, to potential sellers, and you have to get proposals or bids, proposals specifically for tasks, or bids for products like a computer, okay. Proposal is mainly used for a task like a module in a software product, okay. And you have to select a seller depending on these proposals or bids, and then you have to award the contract. And lastly, you have to go for contract closure as well. So what are the approaches for procurement? So they can advertise to procure goods and services in several ways. You can approach the preferred vendor, or approach in several potential vendor, or you can address to anyone interested. You can see those anyone interested, you can put it in the newspaper. You may have seen those articles, newspapers, items, okay. And if you're going to preferred vendors, you may have a list of vendors in your company. In university also, when you're procuring, we have a list of vendors, certified vendors, maybe in that yellow pages, maybe taken from the yellow pages, so some source like that. So we have the institution preferred vendors. So in your IT organization also, there may be set of vendors who may have, other projects may have done procurements with. So you may also send the same specifications for them to bid for that, okay. Or you may approach several potential vendors. You can look at the market and you can send for some potential vendors, okay. So there may not be any restrictions given by your company to go for this vendor, like in the first case, okay. In this first case, you only go for the preferred vendors you may have experience contracting with, maybe previously with your organization. But here we are approaching several vendors, okay, several potential vendors. But here we are advertising to anyone who are interested. That's how these three types differ one another, okay. And there's another thing you can do, a bidders conference, okay. So it would help to clarify buyers' expectations. In this bidders conference, you can advertise the bidders conference, so anyone interested would come for that, and it would clarify what are the expectations. If it's a task, in that conference, you can mention for the potential sellers that this is the product we need and this is the standard we require. So likewise, you can mention about the requirements you require specifically for the set of sellers in that bidders conference. And source selection is, so after we do that procurement, we can do this either for a specific set of vendors or potential vendors or anyone interested. We can send them, or we can hold the bidders conference if it's particularly if it's a task, okay. So so that would allow the bidders to ask questions as well and clarify the thing that need to be outsourced. And source selection. So in this source selection, we are evaluating proposals or bids from sellers, okay. So this is mainly done by the managers and technically sound people if it's a component or an item you are going to buy. So now we are sent with the proposals. Proposals are sent by the sellers, and also bids are with us. Several vendors may have sent the bids, and proposals also. In the case of task, proposals may have received. So in the table, we have a set of proposals sent by different sellers. Okay, so you have to choose the best one. Okay, and then after choosing the best proposals or bids, you have to negotiate with the contract, and finally you have to choose one seller or a buyer from the set of bids or proposals you received, and then you have to award the contract. Okay. So this is a sample proposal evaluation sheet. This is not done by a single person. Project manager is not the solely responsible person. So he is the responsible, but he would not be the only person who is doing this. Okay, normally a committee is there to take this into consideration. So there should be some criteria agreed by the team members or committee members to select the best proposals from the set of proposals received. Okay, so here you can see, so assume that in this particular example, they are talking about a product, not a product, actually a task. Okay, so a particular module of your software need to be outsourced. So you have requested proposals, and you can see the proposals received, proposal 1, proposal 2, proposal 3, etc. And the criteria is given. Okay, criteria is, since it's a module development, so the criteria is given like this: technical approach followed, and management approach followed, past performance, and the associated price. So they are given weights. Okay, for the technical approach, 30%. For the management approach, again 30%. Past performance, 20%. And for the price, 20%. Okay, and the proposals are proposal 1, proposal 2, proposal 3, etc. And there's a rating given. Rating and the score is should be responded by the committee members. And depending on the rating, you can give the rate 1, 2, 3, 4 like that, and the score is given depending on the weight. 30, if maximum amount is 30%. Okay, if the total score is 100 marks, 30 marks are given for the technical approach they follow. Okay, so rating would be given by a number which has the best one has number 1, and if there are 3 proposals, 1, 2, 3, likewise the rating will be given. So after that evaluation, seller selection should happen. So so always organizations do an initial evaluation, and they develop a short list of potential sellers for further evaluation. And sellers on the short list often prepare a best and final offer. Okay, final output is a contract signed by buyer and the contract seller. So after we develop this, so you can develop a short list. So by taking into account about the score and the rating you received as numbers here. So you can then prepare a short list. A best and the final offer would be determined by this short list. Okay. Then final output of a contract would be signed by the buyer and the selected seller. So by signing, you are legally bound. Okay, for supplying the product from the seller's side and paying for that contract from the buyer's side. So the next one is the last process, which is not the last one. The last one is the closure. So this is control in procurement. So one before the last. So that would ensure that the seller's performance meets contracts requirements. So now we have carried out the contracts. So now we are controlling the contracts. So after we sign the contract, we have to keep an eye on the performance of the seller with the requirements. Okay. So they are legal relationships. So it's important that legal and contracting professionals be involved in writing and administering contracts. So there should be a lawyer there. Okay. So it's when you're signing this contract. So it's critical that project managers and team members watch for constructive change orders, because things can change. So our requirements can sometimes change. So we have to accordingly, we have to act for that changes. So either accepting the change or rejecting is, you have to decide that, okay? So you have to work with these changes very carefully, because with change orders, which are oral or written acts or omissions by someone may not, omit some specifications with the actual authority can be constructed to have the same effect as change order. Okay, so because of these changes, actually these changes handled by a particular team. There's a particular team should be in your project to work with this change, to control the changes. Okay. So these are the suggestions given for change control, particularly in contracts, because contracts are legally bound. Changes to any part of the project which you are going to outsource need to be reviewed, approved and documented by the same people in the same way that the original part of the plan was approved. So this is mainly because you worked with some other set of people and they know the requirement, and after change was happened, different people work on that. So they may not know the facts they considered when you did the same thing previously. Okay. So about the contract, the people who involved knows the best. So the same committee need to be involved in any changes happen. So any change that you are going to entertain or that you are going to allow should be analyzed very well for the impact that would occur on your project. Okay. So that means how will the goods or service being provided change or affect the scope, time, cost, and quality. So if there's a change requested by the seller for an extension of 3 months time duration for the supply of the particular product, so if, that committee should determine whether that would affect the schedule. Okay, so they can simply have a look at the schedule of the project and look at for which processes that outsourcing affects. Okay, so if it affects a lot for the deadline, so then you may not be able to accept that change for the particular contract. Okay, so all changes must be documented, because so you know, so when you are giving the contract also, you look at the history of the contract. So if there are any things that you may have missed, so that would not be documented. Okay, documented. So then that would be caught by the people who are going to procure the same product from the same vendor. Okay. And project managers and team members should stay closely involved to make sure the new system will meet business need and work in an operational environment. And also you should have backup plans always, because when you are outsourcing things out of your control, so if something went wrong from the other side, you can't just blame them, because the main product's responsibility is with yourself. So because of that, you should have always other plans if the things went wrong. Okay. And also you need to have these kind of tools and techniques with you, which are defined based by this PMI, contract change control system. So we have discussed about that, and buyer conducted performance reviews and inspections and audits. So these inspections and audits would allow you to identify any cost overrun happened, or what happened with the contracts, and so on, whether the money is allocated for particularly intended task. So the best practices for these procurements are given by different organizations. So Accenture is one of the organizations who develop a list of best practices from experienced outsourcers when you are doing outsourcing with organizations. So here they mentioned, these are the first 7 I extracted: building broad business outcomes early and often, hire a partner, not just a provider. It's more than a contract, it's a business relationship. So when you are doing just outsourcing, you should not think like this is a temporary thing we are going to do. Okay. So that relationship you build in between the organization and yourself, outsourcing organization and yourself, is more than that temporary contract. Okay, so if you're thinking like that, you can develop partnerships. You can develop relationships, not partnerships actually. Very good relationship between the outsourcing organization and yourself. It's beneficial to your organization as well as organization who are going to who you are outsourcing with. Okay. So likewise, this Accenture have developed a list of best practices. You can have a look at that at their website and what are the guidelines given. And this is the last process. So the last one is closing procurements. So this involves completing and settling contracts and resolving any open items. So, so assume that assume that your client, so you are the project manager, so you are not given money after 6 months for your project, and you have started contracts and sellers, you have signed some legal documents with the sellers. So what are you going to do? So one thing you must do is you have to, if you are going to end up with the project, so because they may be not interested with the product you're producing, so they may have stopped giving money to you. So because of that situation, you are also going to close the project. Okay. So one thing you must do is close in these contracts or procurements. So at the end of the project, if everything went well also, if there are any open contracts, you have to close them. Okay. So this involves completing and settling contracts. And if there are any open items mean they have not provided yet, but you have started with the contract. So you have to resolve all of them. And project team should determine all work has completed. So at the end of the project, if everything went right, at the end also you had to determine if all works completed correctly and satisfactorily, and you had to update records to reflect the final results, and you had to archive the information for future use. Okay, so this is related with the procurements. Okay, so this is not, we are not talking broadly about the project work. Okay, so this work is specifically about contract related work. So we have to determine if contract related work was completed correctly and satisfactorily by the seller. Okay, and if there are anything, if they have delayed the product, you have to keep records, okay, for the future use. And so that is called archiving. And this completed correctly and satisfactorily, how can we determine that? So I think you can remember we had a section called acceptance criteria. So that would define how we are going to satisfy this completeness and correctness and satisfiability. And these are the tools which should assist in contract closure. Procurement audits, which should identify lessons learned in the procurement process, and negotiated settlements help close contracts more smoothly. So because you can negotiate with the contractor or the seller, and the record management system would provide the ability to easily organize, find, and archive the procurement related documents. Okay, so these are some tools introduced to make things go much smoothly, like procurement audits. You use it to identify lessons learned. So those are the tools I choose to discuss here. However, if you look at the project management body of knowledge, there are more tools than this available to assist in contracts, not only in contract closure, in other areas of other processes as well, conducting procurements and controlling procurements. So there are many other tools available for a project manager to do the things smoothly. Okay, so it's up to you to read about those tools available, and you can look at the templates. We looked at few templates here, that proposal related request proposal template, and also proposal evaluation sheet. This is one kind of evaluation carried out. So there are different kinds of evaluations that can be carried out apart from this. So that would be specific for the particular task you are going to outsource. And what was the other template we were discussing about? This statement of work was the other template which we discussed about, where we can specify the task for the seller. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So this ends up today's lesson. So next week we'll be discussing about integration managed together with stakeholder management. And so after those two topics, we have covered up all the 10 knowledge management areas. Okay. So with the previous batches, I only have discussed 9 knowledge management areas. However, since PMI introduced the stakeholder management, so I thought of including that also to the syllabus. So that also is included in this year. Okay. So you can read widely about this topic from, as I mentioned, that IT project management book, chapter 12 of the edition 8. So that would give you some more information about these processes and the tools. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.